Well, um, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me here to talk. It's really a privilege to have this opportunity to address such an audience. Before I get into my presentation, though, I just want to have a few words and reflections on this formidable and exciting presentation that Nikki gave, because one of my reflections was that the issues that Nikki was talking about, important issues, are exactly the same issues that we are facing in the private industry, in leadership groups. But I picked up a few points, Nikki, that you presented. How do we get the best from people who are not wired like us? Which I will add to that, how do we best align people that are not wired like us, which is important. I will cover that later in my presentation. One other important point you made was, and I think this is probably, so fundamental, never assume. Never assume. I break normally this word assume down into as, you, and me. Because when we assume too much, we get into conflict situations. And what Nikki's told us, ask questions, understand where the other comes from, and his motivations for his points of view. Understand what matters most to people is also something I'm going to cover. Because as I think Andy told in his introduction, different people have different perceptions, different thinking, and different behavior. And for a leader, this is so important to understand in order to avoid unnecessary conflicts. And the last point I want to make from Nikki's presentation was leading sideways. And after my presentation, I hope you get the feeling that, of course, leading sideways definitely is important. But leading vertically between different mindsets and different value systems is also crucial. So with this is what I'm going to cover in the next 21 minutes. Talk about different people, different perception, different mindsets. Share a personal story, one of my failures and one of my biggest learnings I went through as a first job as managing director. And then I'm going to talk about spiral dynamics. It's an awful name. But basically, it's about people's value systems. And as Andy already told, it was implemented during the apartheid regime in South Africa and basically all over the world. And then understanding what drives people, that these basic, fundamental, evolutionary built value systems are what drives our thinking and behavior, and what causes all the mess we today have in the world. It's not a class of civilizations, as Huntington, for those who have read Huntington's class of civilization. It's a class of memes, it's a class of value systems. And then, of course, last but not least, address the topic of perceptions versus reality. Because perceptions will always win. Truth will never win. Perceptions will. And that's going back to some of Nikki's point. And then, of course, I want to link this into the topic of safety, because that's the topic of this conference. Now, let me start by this. When we talk to each other, as a leader or as a colleague, we often use words without checking what we actually mean. So I've put up this slide here. What do we mean when we say diversity? What do we mean by humanity? What do we mean when we say charity or any other topic? We just go into the discussion without having aligned each other. What exactly are we talking about? And when we talk about safety, and this would be my recommendation, humble though recommendation, to those of you who works with safety, that if you look up at this slide here, when we talk about safety, safety for which people? What does safety mean to different people? Because different people have different perceptions. And unless we understand this, we might build more frustration and confusion than alignment. So I've taken a slide here. This is a team. I have no experience with oil platforms or anything like that, but you could use this as an example also from the private industry. When you look at this, we have different guys. We have the leader here. Let's call him the leader. Hope you can see it here. He says, guys, we must work proactively with safety. Then there are guys around him saying here, so what do you mean by safety? And the other guys, reflect on this. The guy here thinks, safety, it's not a problem here. We're wasting our time. Let's move on. Or this guy over here, well, he thinks safety is extremely important for me. And the last guy here, we just have to follow the rules, then everything will be fine. And if you recall Nikki's presentations about the different leadership styles, it's hidden in those comments here. Then I want to get in and tell you about one of the big challenges and failures I've had. I was a sales manager in a rather big Nordic organization with a regional sales and marketing office in Copenhagen, covering Nordic area. And we had a regional sales and marketing director, and it was all organized as a region. Then the company decided to split up this region into different individual countries. And they named a managing director for Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Those were the 4 countries. Iceland were under Denmark. And I was privileged enough, after having been sales manager for 2 years, to get promoted into this managing director position. I was extremely excited about it. And it went well. I had a very young leadership group, average age early 30s. And we had a very nice performance. But I had one problem, albeit a major problem, that every time one of my guys, my sales director, my marketing director, my medical director, any of them, went into international meetings we had a regional headquarters. I reported into Brussels. And then I had a dotted line reporting into Indianapolis, US. And every time one of my guys have been there, I got phone calls asking the question, Teddy, are you sure you have the right people? And it really was a challenge for me. I defended my team because I was firmly convinced that I had the right team here. And fortunately enough, our performance were really top performance. And if there's something that a huge American pharmaceutical company understands, is profit. So as long as we delivered, I was kind of safe, but I had really challenges. And it bothered me, it took a lot of time. Then on a flight back from a business trip into Indianapolis, I went into the bookstore in Chicago O'Hare, and I just picked a book by chance. I had no clue what kind of book it was. I picked it by chance. And that book is this one here, called A Theory of Everything, an integral vision for business, policies, science, and spirituality. I'm not that spiritual, let me tell you that. But nevertheless, I went into the book. It was in the times where we always flew business class. So I sat there nice, enjoyed life, and read this book. And the first chapter in this book was called The Amazing Spiral. And after having read these 16 pages, no more than 16, I suddenly realized what I was up against with the challenges I had with my leadership group and my headquarters in Brussels and my headquarters in the US. Became absolutely clear to me. And it touches upon some of the topics that Nikki already spoke. Now, spiral dynamics, as is the name of the theory, and it's just a theory. It's not a new management fad. It's not a religion. It's a frame for understanding people and how people think and perceive and behave. That's the basic fundamental essence of spiral dynamics. It was developed by the two gentlemen here. Both have passed. Professor Clare Graves was the inventor. He worked as a professor at Union College in New York. And the other guy, Dr. Don Beck, who became a private friend of mine until he passed last year, he developed into this theory called spiral dynamics. So, spiral dynamics, basically, the essence of this, normally I use a couple of days to transfer this knowledge into audience, but spiral dynamics is a psychological development model based on the evolutionary cognitive development of individuals, organizations, and societies, and it provides a new way of framing and understanding the forces of human interaction and behavior. As such, it's a frame for understanding how, as Andy pointed out, how people perceive, think, behave, react, and adapt to the changing life conditions, and what they perceive and think. And, sorry, not what they perceive and think. So we have, on the one side, life conditions that we are confronted with. On the other side, we have perception and adaptation. And these adaptations and perceptions are based on our value systems. Let me go back to the story about my challenges with my management group, because after having read this book, I invited Don Beck over, and I trained my group, leadership group, twice actually, and we learned to adopt and align our thinking and communication with the thinking and communication in Brussels and in Indianapolis. There are huge differences. While we were talking about from a Scandinavian leadership point of view, let's sit down and talk. Let's sit down and achieve consensus. We're in a team. Whereas our colleagues were mostly focusing on market shares and sales evolution and growth and things like that. And that's where the confusion came up. We had a different point of view and a different perception about how we work together. And that was the trick here, because we were able, by understanding fundamental elements of this theory, to adjust our communication. So we adjusted our communication so they got what they needed. I'll explain the model in a second. So we talked their language, which is belonging to what I call the orange value system. You will see that in a second. But first and foremost, understand where they came from and where we came from. Some of you might know, I'm sure most of you will know, the famous Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, who had a wonderful, wonderful sentence saying that in order to help people, you first and foremost have to understand where people are and start there. Everything else is ignorance. First and foremost, understand where people are. Going back to safety and safety leadership, first and foremost, we have to understand where people are and start there. Otherwise, they will unconsciously block. You can either have an open mind, an arrested mind, or a closed mind. And in order to open the mind, you have to start where people are. So understanding people and another culture involves understanding another's value and belief systems, and not just another spoken language. That's actually the key message. Be aware of value systems that people are working from. So that is my postulate. This is the theory, just a theory, not a religion, not a management fad, that we are under the operation of different value systems. And I was fascinated by Niki's, I think he was a goal-getter or something like that. And if you look at this, you could put it into the spiral dynamics frame as well. Let me go back here. Because the value systems that spiral dynamics are built on has been kind of built up from an evolutionary point of view. Starting with going back many millions of hundreds of thousands of years, where the basic challenge for any person living there, any Homo sapiens, was to survive. It was instinctive. It was about getting food. It was about warmth. It was about reproduction. Basic instincts that Jung, the famous Freud colleague, said, don't forget that you carry the brain of a 2 million-old man. Then once you have built and obtained the basic instinctive survival terms, then we started to build clans and families. And clans and families operate primarily at that time. The key topic of them was safety. Safety for my clan, safety for my family. How do we survive together? And further on, after a certain time, we evolved again, and we saw some more egoistic behavior coming out in the red, what we call power gods. And you have them already, autocratic leaders. You will see is really driven by the mindset in the red color, or what I call power god. And then up to the truth force, and here, I don't hope I embarrass you, but military, Niki, is really coming out of the blue mindset. It's order, it's systems. You said standard operating procedures and things like that. Hopefully, if you have an accounting, I hope he's operating out of the blue mind system, because that's needed. And then after that, with Enlightenment, historical, evolutionary, came the orange mindset. It's about success, it's about materialism, it's about living an affluent life, that we have so much in our part of the world. And next, up into the Scandinavian, typical Scandinavian, I call it centers of gravity, which means tyngdepunkt in Danish, centers of gravity that we operate out of. A typically consensus-oriented, harmony, feel good kind of convictions. And let me just make a little line back to the completely, I would say, failure of integration, because we bring people typically with a background not worse than us, actually sometimes better. We bring people from the purple, red into the green. Failure, I promise you, it won't work. So you have to adjust the different memes to each other. And then up into the human bond, as I said, Scandinavian. And the first 6 levels we just name them first tier, first level. And then my hope is that we start to see some second tier thinking. Because second tier thinking, coming back to my comment, is the ability to lead across different mindsets and different value systems. That's vertical leader. And I haven't seen a lot of it any place in the world today, but nevertheless, that's the trick. One important point, as you can see here, the different memes or value systems tends to alternate between an I focus, ego, and a collective focus. That's just the nature of the model. So, faced with increasing complexity, we adapt, we learn and adapt accordingly. And I will make one challenge, which I do when I do seminars as well. I believe the complexity of today's world has somehow exceeded our cognitive capacity to kind of comprehend the complexity. Key message across any kind of, whether it's countries or leadership groups, that people have the right to be who people are. But one important addition to that is that never at the expense of others. But appreciate the diversity, talking about safety, but people have the right to be who people are, but not at the expense of others. The challenge here, and I still have some time left here, is I talked about we don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. So that's the perception. We take in inputs from the surrounding world and we perceive them. And if you look here, two people can see the same thing, disagree, and yet both be right. It's not logical, it's psychological. Just looking at this one here. No, it's a signal. No, it's a line. You see the same. Hope you get the point here. That's what often happens, even in senior leadership groups. Or here, 4 bars. No, 3 bars. Just to present an example of how often we go wrong. By not coming back to Nikki's point, by assuming we know what the other talks about and thinks. So how do we unleash energy? Because that's a critical topic of this conference. How do you unleash the energy? I was constantly asked that by the people I worked with before the conference. How do we unleash it? Well, basically, and these are the key takeaways for me, that I hope you have got a good feeling about, even over this last 20 minutes or so, that what drives people are value systems. And in order to effectively align people, you first and foremost have to understand where they work from, by asking questions as well. The role of value systems, spiral dynamics, in order to accomplish what you need to accomplish, for instance, execution of leadership and safety leadership. People have the right to be who people are. I just want to mention that as well, but not at the expense of others. And remember this last comment, different strokes to different folks. Going back to my experience, when I talk with the US people and I talk with the European management team. So this is coming back. You remember, I hope you remember the slide. You see different colors because people operate from different mindsets. And the different colors here should reflect that they have a different approach to problems. So with this, a few reflections relative to safety leadership. I really like this one. CFO asks CEO, what happens if we invest in developing our people and they leave? And the CEO responds, what happens if we don't and they stay? You probably have seen it before. Well, that's so crucial. And the last one here, from this gentleman over here that most of you know, Virgin, Richard Branson, train people well enough so they can leave, treat them well enough so they don't want to. And with this, my I have 22 seconds left, but thank you.